Hey everyone, it's Dr. Robinson. I am going to go over chapter 3. This is the video for chapter 3. You have chapter 3 PowerPoints uploaded already, the ones that are associated with your book. I'm going to upload another set that are going to closely go with this video. So I'm looking at them now. I'm going to speak to you from them in this little introduction to your chapter. And I'm going to upload those separately so you can review them. I just like this is a pretty heavy chapter, and I want to give you as much information as possible. I sort of mentioned already your book is not my favorite book, so I hope to supplement some of the information from your book in this introduction. So this chapter is about substances and their effects on your body. So how do substances affect your body physiologically, psychologically, what's going on, and then of course going into some of the substances, specific substances, and a little bit about that. When we talk about addiction, that sort of an overall definition of addiction is compulsive use despite the negative consequences. So continuing to use despite emotional, psychological, physiological, familial, different aspects of your life that are negative, that may be going negatively or may have had negative consequences, and the use or the relationship with the substance continues, and there is a need. I'm very pleased at some of you guys' responses to Gabor Mate's video. It seems like you guys kind of pick up on what he's saying and his theory and his approach, and I have an optimistic view of the field of addiction in general, that it's moving more in that direction. The view is moving in that direction. So if we look at addiction from that perspective, or if we look at addiction considering that perspective, that there are so many components to why this relationship with addiction is so powerful, or the substance is so powerful. So it should be no surprise that when we look at like what this does to your body, that it has many components. So addiction has many components. There's no one way of saying this is why it happens, this is how it happens, and this is unequivocally what this affects. There's too many components. And that it may or may not involve a physical dependence. We often assume that you have to have a dependence. Well, we know that more times than not that's accurate, but that the dependence doesn't necessarily have to be physical. We'll get into dependence and withdrawal intolerance in just a second. Okay, so let's see. We know that there's not one single biological factor that contributes to addiction. We cannot easily explain it. And that we do know that your brain changes. So permanently changes. Some changes are not permanent, but a lot of changes are permanent. We know that there are changes in the neurons and the connections and levels of neurotransmitters, and we know that that the more substances that are introduced into an individual's body, the more vulnerable the individual is. So the more substances that are introduced, the more amount of time substances are introduced, the more quantity substances are introduced, the more susceptible and vulnerable an individual becomes to maintaining and sustaining that unhealthy relationship with a substance or behavior. I mentioned in the previous introduction the reward pathway. So if I go into that, the reward pathway, stay with me here as I describe this. So the reward pathway, we know, is sort of like the most primitive aspect of your brain. It is the part of our brain that we know has been around, if you will, the longest amount of time. This area of our brain is more is newer in its evolution and newer in its capabilities. But this reward pathway is much more primitive. And so what the reward pathway says to us, or what it does, is it's responsible for those life-saving, sustaining sort of things that we do: fight, flight, freeze, those responses. So I said bear with me, so bear with me as I describe this. If you think back to sort of like caveman time, or I heard a physician sort of describe this as like our lizard brain. I'm going to talk about this in caveman sort of language, I think, as opposed to lizard brain. But if you think about sort of the necessities of being a caveman, a hunter or a gatherer, you needed to eat, you needed to survive, and you needed to procreate. And so the reward pathway sort of sustained all of that. The reward pathway said, I need to eat. Having food in my belly feels good. I'm going to continue to do this. I need to run away from a huge dinosaur. This doesn't feel good. I need to avoid that. So I'm going to continue to remember these things now. I'm going to remember that eating felt good. I'm going to remember that and want to do it again. Saving my life. That was instinctual. I needed to run away. I need to continue to do that. Every time I'm threatened or challenged, I need to make sure I protect myself, whether it's run away or it's fight. And then procreation, that's a sort of an innate thing, if you will, for us. And so we can trace that back to, again, I need to sustain humans. And then even so, going a little bit further, also having sex feels good. So I'm going to remember this is something that I need to do for survival, but also it feels good. So I'm going to continue to do it. So if you're picking up on this, it feels good. I'm going to do it again. Avoiding danger feels good. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to remember all of these things and go back to that whenever I'm faced with it. I hope you stayed with me for that, because we're going to come to a little diagram or an illustration in a minute that I think speaks to that. So it's that memory part that drives the continued need or want to use. So again, this feels good, I want to do it again. This feels good, I want to do it again. Human beings have evolved to the point that we don't need to fight or flight, procreate or freeze, simply. We have evolved to rely on other means of staying alive and sustaining. But our reward pathway is still there. So the messages and the purpose of the reward pathway still exist. So when someone has an addictive use disorder, that reward pathway is what's really sort of working. That is what's really driving use. So if you think about it in terms of, think about the way I was describing sort of caveman and cavewoman, and then now sort of apply this to addictive use disorders today. And you think about this feels good, I want to do it again. Now let's take that a little step further. The pain that I'm experiencing in my life doesn't feel good, but avoiding the pain in my life feels good. And I remember that whenever I engage in this substance or I engage in this use, I don't have to feel pain. So that feels good. I want to do this again. In the Gabor Mate video, we've talked a little bit about how he discussed, why are you in so much pain? Instead of asking, why are you addicted to this, or what's wrong with you? Let's ask, why are you in so much pain? Why do you feel, what is so upsetting or painful that it makes sense for you to escape, flight? It makes sense for you to sort of fight. I'm going to rail against this pain, and maybe it makes sense for you to freeze. I just want to be numb. I want to be numb. I don't want to feel this. And then the memory aspect of our reward pathways says, keep doing this. So there's this constant loop, and the substance is now necessary to maintain that loop. I really hope you guys followed that. I welcome a conversation if I lost you. There's a video on that I've uploaded that goes into that as well. And then I've got a PowerPoint that is kind of like an animation PowerPoint that describes that as well. It's the 6th slide in the PowerPoints that I'm going to upload. So they say Dr. R's PowerPoint for chapter 3. So now that you know that there's this lack of control, overwhelming drive from this memory of wanting to do these or engage in this behavior or do these behaviors over again, that serves a purpose. You kind of see why sustaining and maintaining an addictive use disorder makes complete sense. Why the individual has such a strong relationship with their use, whether it's substance or behavioral. Going on, your chapter does a lot of physiology and biology lesson for you. It does a lot of description of that. But what you need to know are that nerve cells and neurotransmitters all play a role in this, that neurotransmitters, the release of these neurotransmitters, the amount of neurotransmitters all fluctuate with use. There are specific neurotransmitters that really play a role in maintaining substances and maintaining addiction and maintaining these feelings that we want to either have, escalate, or not have. The video that I uploaded goes into that really well. It does a good job of describing that. Let's see, what do I want you to know? Through compulsive use, again, that your brain is physically damaged and it's less capable of learning. Our brains are pretty strong, and there's a lot of known plasticity in our functioning and in our brain development. But when you engage in substances, there is damage. There's permanent damage. Some damage is somewhat recoverable, but a lot of it is permanent. I want to talk a little bit about tolerance and withdrawal. So there's a misconception that if you're addicted, like the definition of being addicted is just simply needing a substance, just needing it, just simply needing a substance. And what we know is that is dependence. Certainly that's dependence. So if we become dependent upon something, we're not necessarily going to be addicted to something. So for example, if I break my arm really bad and I have to have surgery, they're going to give me pain meds. Well, I'm going to probably, depending upon the amount of pain meds, I'm going to probably develop a dependence. That does not mean I develop a addiction. It means I've developed a dependence. It may also mean that I have developed a tolerance, which means I need more and more of the substance to achieve the desired effect. I need more substances to no longer have pain associated with my surgery on my arm. Individuals who have an addictive use disorder do develop a tolerance to substances and behaviors. I need more and more of the substance or the behavior to get the same effect. That same effect could be not feeling the pain, or escalating a higher or a happier or a better positive feeling. I need more and more substance to continue to have that same effect. A higher tolerance, this is important, a higher tolerance, if you think you have a higher tolerance, it doesn't mean you are not as great a risk of becoming addicted. So higher tolerance doesn't equal less risk of addiction. So moving on to withdrawal, that relates to sort of the physical and the mental symptoms that appear or become present if the substance is stopped. So if you no longer need the substances, your body is going to go through a withdrawal that says, I don't have this in my body anymore, and so there's going to be some sort of physical or psychological symptom associated with that. A real quick note about withdrawal. Withdrawal is the opposite of the intended effect of the substance. So opiates are a numbing substance. So withdrawal is the opposite of that, which means everything is on like hyperdrive. Your emotions, your body chemistry, your digestive system, your respiration, your temperature, body temperature. If you are addicted to cocaine and you go through withdrawal, it's the opposite of the intended effect. The intended effect of cocaine is to be up and alert and full of energy. And so withdrawal is the opposite of that. Depressed, anxious, irritable. Again, opposite of the intended effect. That's important.